Now, the topic this week is talking about normal operating conditions as it applies to electrical safety, and this is in NFPA 70. The reason I decided to do this talk because somebody had actually messaged me and was asking, they were trying to understand what is considered a normal operating condition. And the reason that this went into 70E, because when it first started, I would be out instructing and other instructors that were on the 70E committee. And we would basically tell them what a normal operating condition was. And they'd say, well, there's nothing that says that. And so what we ended up doing was coming in and adding it. It used to be in Article 130, and now it's moved into the general requirements in Article 110. Okay. So,
Well, and I think that's important too because, like, I think we were talking about this with the when you go into, like, let's just say the example of the child getting killed in Chicago, like jumping on that AC unit. Is that fair to the manufacturers to say they have to make some changes when that's not normal operating condition of their equipment?
yeah, and we beat that death a little bit, but like I said, there was no technical substantiation from the co-making panel to do that. So,
10-4.
but
All right.
when you look at this and you get into this and you look at your energized work over in 110.4D, and it talks about normal operating conditions, it tells you that the that normal operation of electrical equipment shall be permitted where no, normal operating condition exists. And then we come through and give you 6 items here that we talk about what is a normal operating condition. Okay.
Right.
And these items have to be satisfied to meet this. Okay. Now, before I do that, I want to look at the informational note because it tells you here the phrase properly installed means that the equipment is installed in accordance with the applicable industry codes and standards and the manufacturer's recommendations. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is, you know, one of the things that they were talking about, there were a couple of guys supposed to be experts were saying that the code overrides the manufacturer's instructions. No, it doesn't. Okay. And what they're telling you here is we're explaining that you have applicable industry codes. So let's go to that one first. It
Okay.
says the equipment is installed. Now, you've heard me say this over and over and over. The NEC is an installation manual. Okay.
Yep.
I've said that so many times. And when you get into looking at this is what we're talking about. You're installing by the National Electrical Code, and then there could be some other standards you may need to look at, like you talk about doing fire alarms. You may need
Okay.
to look at 72, NFPA 72. Maybe I have some custom made equipment. Not only am I tying it in with UL standards, but I'm tying it in with NFPA 79. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? It
Yeah,
depends.
and NFPA 72 almost always the manufacturer's instructions override the NFPA 72. But I know that just to throw the little disclaimer out there, in no way can the manufacturer instructions create a direct code violation. So there is certain cases where a manufacturer will sell a product. Like I've seen it before with those little screw-in things that have little two-prong screw-in things. You could screw them into anything. Well, they're not going to have a disclaimer saying if you go screw that into a bathroom, that's a code violation.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's
there's certain
certain.
things you got to look at, but some of that stuff
Yeah,
that's manufacturer's instructions they're using out there are not even listed and labeled anyway.
true.
So that's another thing I would look at. But I also
Agreed.
will put in say I'm in a hazardous location, okay, and I'm classifying a location. Well, the installation that's going in there is dependent on what is the classification of the location. Well, you're not going to do all that in the National Electrical Code Articles 500, 501, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to determine most of the time the location from NFPA 497 and 499. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about when the phrase states properly installed. Okay. And then it says the phrase properly maintained means that the equipment has been maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendation and applicable industry codes and standards. Well, when you're looking at this, you're either applying based on what? The manufacturer's instructions, or I'm looking at using NFPA 70B, which is my maintenance
Sure.
standard, and that's referenced over in not only in the National Electrical Code, but also in 70E. When you go look at 200.1 and you pick up the informational note, it says about maintaining, and it says the manufacturer's instructions or NFPA 70B, which is your maintenance for electrical equipment. Okay?
Yeah, and that's a good point because we ran into one before where it was like it was some kind of like 400 amp, 200 amp disconnect that was that ran the elevator equipment room,
Uh-huh.
and they had it as part of their testing. And what they ended up doing was they ended up like getting it to where the handle wouldn't even work anymore on the disconnect. So they were having to get all these different things in there, like pry bars in there, and operate the handle every time they tested it. And they were like, hey, we need you to fix this. And I was like, it's got to be replaced. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to try to repair something that you guys have put pry bars on and done all kinds of bending. And, I'd have to do body work on the handle just to get it, the other handle to fit. And I'm not doing that. We're going to replace it. And when we started looking into it, it did need replaced. I mean, there was it been all kinds of problems with it, and they were really glad we replaced it. So that's something to look into.
Sure. And if you look at the last sentence, it talks about the phrase evidence of impending failure. And what does that mean? There's evidence such as what? Arcing, overheating. You can have loose or bound equipment parts, any type of visible damage or deterioration. If that's the case, then that means that equipment's not under normal operating conditions.
Yeah, a
Okay?
lot of times when we see out in gas and oil, you wouldn't believe what the elements do to stuff. I mean, we've had like brand new stuff that we installed, and like within a matter of like 2-3 months, it looks like it'd been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's just the elements just tear that equipment up out there. It's incredible.
That's why you have certain equipment in certain locations.
Oh yeah,
All
oh
right.
yeah.
Now, look at the following conditions now. Number one says the equipment is properly installed. We've addressed that. The equipment is properly maintained. We address that. The
Yeah.
equipment is used in accordance with instructions, including in the listing and labeling, and in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And that's what I was talking about a while ago. Is as the manufacturer's instructions, is that equipment listed and labeled? If it is, as I did in another presentation earlier, I stated that OSHA looks at this as providing safety. And I also stated when UL takes and lists and labels equipment, any other NFPA standards, National Electrical Code, uh, anything that is out there that would apply will be part of that listing and labeling. Therefore, that equipment is designed with safety in mind. Okay.
Yeah, I
Now,
agree.
the next one says the equipment doors are closed and secured. All equipment covers are in place and secured. And the last one, there's no evidence of impending failure. Now,
Yeah.
all of that, I've had people say, well, if I walk past that piece of equipment, am I exposed to an arc? No, you're not, because it's operating under what? Normal operating conditions.
True.
And I've had people ask me that over and over. And I said, what you want to remember, there's some areas that have very, very high cal ratings. Now, when those areas are like that, they got them rooms locked out and everything, and only qualified people are in there. They walk past that equipment no problem at all. Okay. Now,
Yeah, you do have to be careful. We had some stuff out in the gas and oil. I mean, literally the arc flash boundary, like literally like basically the whole boundary was like the room. Like you
that's
couldn't
right.
even walk in that room. Like it was just like you will be vaporized if something goes wrong on that equipment.
Sure.
So you really have, like you say about being qualified and all that. a lot of times what we'd have to do is when we're walking in there was when they were doing like a ramp down and they ramped the whole plant down, and you can go in there and you can do whatever stuff you have, a whole list of tasks to do. Not opening the equipment, you're not exposing energized parts, you don't have to establish electrically safe work condition, but you can go in there and you can, you know, like take care of, like check breakers, make sure all the breakers are clean, make sure, just make sure everything's good to go. Like make sure all your labels are in place, make sure everything's good. But you're not opening equipment, you're not doing anything, you know.
Sure.
And so
It,
you have to
it's like
realize how serious that is.
I was up in Seattle and I went to do looking at their safety and everything for Nucor Steel, and the power that was coming in before they put a really fast clearing time device on it. But where it come in, it was 1,500 cal, and then on the other, once they put the clearing times everything on there, then it dropped it down to like 250 something. But we could actually walk in there, and I took a picture and everything. But I could walk in there because it was normal operating conditions. But that room was secured. Nobody could get in there unless they were qualified to walk in that room. You see what I'm saying? And those are things depending on how the facility looks at things. But when they have a really high cal rating, usually all that equipment in that room's locked out where nobody can get in there except for qualified personnel. So they're aware of the
True.
hazards and everything that are available. Okay.
True.
Now, I want to
100%.
show one more thing here. One of the things, if you go over and you look at table 130.5C, this is an estimate of the likelihood of occurrence of an arc flash incident for AC and DC systems. And what this is to lay out for you to have an understanding of things that we realize that you'll be doing where you're going to have exposure to an arc. So when I say this, what I always tell people is this: if you're just walking by the equipment and everything we just went under on a normal operating conditions, that's how it is. But where you start getting to where you worry about something is when you interact with something. And that's what this is. So when you look at table 130.5C, they're telling you reading a panel meter while operating a meter switch. I mean, we just go through all kinds of things here, and then we give you the next set here. And this is the whole table of everything. And this ties in with when you're working on something energized. And then you would, if you're using the table method, then you would go look at table 130.15 BCA, B, and C. And that's where you pick up the tables when you're using the hazard risk category methods. And then this also applies when you go in and you're doing the calculation method. Okay.
True.
So this is how you want to take and look at 70E as far as normal operating conditions are concerned and when it's abnormal. So I actually call table 130.5C abnormal conditions. In other
True.
words, you're interacting with it. Okay. And
Yeah, and
that's how
what
you want to view this when you're looking at these different type of conditions.
so what would be some examples of abnormal conditions from like the view of 70E? Would that be like taking screws out of a panel cover?
Yeah, because you're interacting with, there's the possibility of an arc. I'm racking something in and out. You're interacting with the equipment, and that's what I've always told everybody. It Whenever you're looking at an abnormal condition, you're interacting with equipment. Now, if it's a
Okay.
piece of equipment you're going up and it's got a digital pad on it, things like that, that's normal operating conditions. But once you start wanting to get inside that equipment and interact with it, other than what the normal operating condition of that equipment is, now you're in an abnormal condition.
Is there any such thing as like an abnormal condition where you're able to examine equipment while energized?
No, I just did that. That's what I was
Okay.
saying. Let me
Yeah,
go
I
back
was
to
just
it.
Yeah, I was just saying.
If you look at this, this is a good example. Oh, I got to go backwards. Okay. Now, if you look there, the very first one says reading a panel meter while operating a meter switch. Okay,
Right.
performing thermography, and other non-contact inspections outside the restricted approach boundary. This activity does not include opening of doors and covers. So you look and you start going through this.
Okay.
These are things that is considered. There's the likelihood of occurrence of an arc flash. Okay,
Okay, I
here's
got you. I see what you're saying.
yeah, like when you start picking this up, uh, they get in where they're talking about you're working on energized electrical conductors and circuit parts. That includes your electrical testing. You see that?
Okay.
You just go
Right.
on down through here. Operation of a circuit breaker or switch the first time after installation, or
Right.
completion of maintenance in the equipment. You're going in, it hasn't been used for that yet. So
So
we're
so
considered, you
those
don't
would
know if that
be
breaker's operating correctly or not yet.
instances where you have to dress.
Sure.
Okay. Gotcha.
And that's why we have that list on there, is so you can go in and look at it. You know what the conditions are that's considered abnormal. And after you have that, then you know if you need to start selecting your PPE or not.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be
Oh, no.
missing the boat on that one. I just want to make sure everyone understood.
Well, the thing is, uh, I've been on the 70E committee since it's pretty much started, and before they ever started putting any of that stuff in. And I've heard everything up to this point, and I just come to the conclusion you have normal operating conditions, and then you have abnormal. And as long as you're meeting those conditions and 110.4D, you're fine. Then you go over and look at the table, and those are all your abnormal conditions, and then you take and go from there.
Yeah, and we might actually get to a point where we can post some people's stories on here. Like maybe do like a little 70E story thing, and then we could post everyone's comments and just talk about their story. I had a story where I had to go unhook. So they had an overhead feed, and it was probably like 100 amp, probably 100 200 amp. It was an overhead feed, and they had to drill caissons.
Hmm.
So they wanted me to drop the overhead feed, so I had to go into the panel. Of course, it's got to be energized while I unhook it, and because they're not gonna shut down the whole
You need to be suited
facility.
up.
True. And so I suited up. I unhooked it. I pulled the whole entire overhead feed out and had it coiled up over across the parking lot or whatever. And I was getting ready with the bucket truck and everything to put it back in once they got the caissons drilled. And so this is a good lesson for a lot of the apprentices too. And so everything was all good. I watched these sign guys go in there. And they're working on the signs. They're doing all kinds of stuff. They're running around doing maintenance and everything. And they get done with the drilling the caissons. They're ready to put the feed back in, and I get the bucket truck over, string it back in, feed it back in the building, and hook it back up. And when I was getting it through because basically it was like an LB that came down, so I could get it into the LB, and then I could get it into the panel to hook it back up. And I touched the screw of the panel, and like instant fireworks show.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, the minute I hit that screw and turned a little bit, instant fireworks show. So that sign company, when they put that cover back on, they had those wedge clamp things.
Hmm.
The wedge clamp things wedged a whole boat of circuits in there.
Yeah.
And the minute I hit that screw, I mean, boom, fireworks show. And I mean, I was glad that I was suited up and everything like that. But I mean, I was kind of mad at that sign company, but I got the cover taken off. Then now my whole mission is now that I know I got, what they wanted done and that restored, now I have to restore all those circuits that blew up. And it would have blown up in my face if I wasn't suited up. But it was just one of those things that I look at. Like I tried to establish an electrically safe work condition. I dressed for, the instant energy, and then there was an incident, and it was that whole thing that how would have I known that those sign guys would have pinched those wires in there, and those sign guys weren't suited up.
Right.
Those sign guys didn't care. Those sign guys didn't have hot gloves on. So it was just kind of one of those things that it made me realize, like when you're in that situation, a lot of the service guys are just like, oh man, I could just take care of it real quick. I'll just knock it out. But a lot of those panel covers, you have those metal hinges in there, and you're putting all those metal parts in there, and they're old, they're not in normal operating condition, and you're trying to manipulate them in there. And if you have an energized panel, that's not an electrically safe work condition.
Right.